I grew up in what you'd call a father-son household. Right after I was born, my mom passed away in an accident, and from then on, it was just me and my dad. Honestly, I can't count the times I was envious of my friends who had mothers, but the reason I never grew tired of living just with my dad is that, even as a child, I knew he cared deeply for me. My dad worked in a small factory, was a big guy, and had a loud voice. He didn't care much about appearances, so he wore his dirty work clothes all year round. Seeing him in casual clothes was a rare sight. Because of that appearance, my dad, dressed in his work clothes, always stood out at elementary school events. It was great that he made the effort to come between work, but kids would say,
Your dad looks cool.
and I was ridiculed. So honestly, at first, it was a mixed feeling. But even though he looked scruffy, I was still happier that he came to school events than if he hadn't, so I gradually got used to it. And by the time I was in higher grades, I could say, Dad's job is like that. It's proof that he's working hard. And I didn't think anything of my dad's appearance or his carefree personality. In addition, unfortunately, my dad had no sense of delicacy. When I was in middle school and walking with my first girlfriend, he was the type to laugh loudly and tease me. I was terribly embarrassed, but
Give this to your girl.
he would often hand over sodas or candies, so I think he was happy in his way. He was clumsy, but he always respected my feelings and watched over me cheerfully. Even without a mother, I wasn't lonely because I had such a dad. However, it's not like I was filled with gratitude every day. As I got older, I gradually started to appreciate my father. Maybe it's because I became an adult, but I think the biggest reason is that I could see my father aging. When I turned 20, my father turned 50. Fortunately, he has been living healthily without any illness, but he did show signs of fatigue. His face had wrinkles, his hair was going gray, and since I grew from a child to an adult, it was only natural that my father was getting old. But when I realized that I had grown bigger than my strong, dependable dad, I had indescribable feelings.
It's hard on an old man.
He would joke, and seeing him, I felt like I need to be good to my parents. But though I felt that way as a college student, I couldn't really put it into action. I didn't have much money, and I was busy with clubs and part-time jobs. Amidst these thoughts, I was finally able to find a job. It's not a huge corporation or anything like that, but a full-time position where I can earn an average income. It's not my first choice, but it's in the field I wanted, and I was able to join a company I can smile about. Of course, my dad was thrilled too.
My boy has grown into such a fine young man. I can't believe I raised him.
He said, toasting with beer, his eyes moistening as he celebrated. I don't think I've quite become a respectable adult yet, but it sure felt good to be considered an ordinary grown-up by my dad. Thankfully, I've been blessed with good relationships at work, having a tough boss and colleagues who encourage each other. And I've gotten off to a good start in my professional life. Although there's one annoying colleague, it's just the way the world works. And not getting along with someone is inevitable. I was content focusing on other things. Finally, my first payday arrived. I had invited my dad out for dinner that very day, planning to treat him. My father often cooked steak for me on special occasions like birthdays when I was a child. Although it wasn't fancy, purchased from the supermarket, it was indeed delicious, and my father seemed happy. So this time, I wanted to give him as much delicious steak as he had never tasted before. I don't think I can fully thank him for raising me with just this, but I hope to give back what I can, bit by bit. That's what I was thinking. When we arrived at the restaurant, I wondered,
Are you really okay with this?
yeah, go ahead, eat as much as you like. My father, delighted with those words, went ahead and ate steak after steak. I did want him to enjoy without restraint, but I was a little surprised at how much he ate. But
I've never had a steak this good. Thank you, really.
with his round face red from the liquor and a big smile, I felt from the bottom of my heart that I was glad I brought him here. But it was my first time eating such an expensive steak too. I've had a wonderful time, feeling content both in body and mind. We'll be living separately, but I'll ask you out for meals again. I was set to start living alone in a place convenient for my work about a week later. Although it was reachable by just one train, I wondered if my dad would feel lonely. He looked a bit forlorn and nodded his agreement. After eating our fill, we paid the bill. and as we were about to leave the restaurant,
Hey, Elias.
I heard a familiar voice and turned to see my coworker, Luca. Honestly, he's the last person I'd want to meet in my private time. Why? Because he's the only person I have trouble with among my peers. Raised in a wealthy family and a graduate of a prestigious university, Luca tends to look down on others. I wonder if he's especially like that with me, who doesn't come from a rich background.
Huh, you come to places like this too. Surprising.
He didn't specify what he found surprising, but I guess he meant that it's unexpected for someone like me, who grew up in a poor family, to be in an upscale restaurant. Well, I'm not one to be bothered by that kind of thing anyway. I treated my dad to a meal since I got my first paycheck. I had only meant to say that before leaving, but what happened next with Luca was beyond my imagination.
Heck, is that your old man?
Luca said, looking somewhat surprised. Yeah, that's him. I replied, and then,
Your dad sure looks shabby. Can't believe you could eat together.
he stated clearly. Honestly, it wasn't the first time someone made a comment like that about my dad in his work clothes. It's happened countless times since I was a child. I'm not bothered by it now, but I was concerned that my dad might hear. It would shock him, as carefree as he appears. I glanced at my dad, and he was looking at a poster by the entrance, not noticing anything. Good, he didn't hear. Feeling relieved, I responded to Luca. It's no big deal. He's my dad after all. People like this will only become more obnoxious if you argue with them, so it's best to ignore them. But Luca exceeded my expectations.
No, even if you're fine with it, it's an inconvenience to others. I'd be embarrassed. Poor people are insensitive about these things.
He said, it was probably the first time in my life someone said something like that to me. It's unavoidable to be considered dirty when wearing work clothes for my job, but they're properly washed and don't smell. My dad takes pride in his work clothes, with his name embroidered on them. Indeed, work clothes might not be suitable for a fancy restaurant, but this place is popular because they don't care about such things. Is Luca harassing me simply because he sees us as poor? I couldn't help but think so after such comments. But I tend to let things slide and handle them calmly. Maybe so. I said that much and was about to leave Luca. I was having a good time with my dad, but my mood had completely changed. As long as my dad didn't hear, I just didn't want to be involved anymore.
You, being poor, should stick to meat you can afford.
I heard those words loudly from behind me as I was leaving the restaurant. And then,
Shut up.
a voice from the side surprised me, and I looked over to see a woman in her 60s wearing a beautiful pale blue dress. I thought I had caused a disturbance at the entrance, so I apologized. Sorry, I'll leave now. But the woman said,
It's not you. I was talking to that arrogant man over there.
Luca didn't like that and replied rudely.
Who are you, lady? Mind your own business.
You don't have to be involved to see that you're in the wrong place with that ugly expression. Look at yourself before you say nasty things to others.
The woman said calmly and then turned to me.
You're a man. Stand up for yourself better.
Yes, ma'am, I replied, my mind not quite catching up with what was happening.
From now on, always be a kind young man who cherishes your father.
She said, giving me a warm smile and a friendly pat on the shoulder before walking away. I wasn't quite sure what had just transpired, but the fact that the woman spoke up for me when I couldn't made me really happy. The next day at work, it seemed like Luca's attitude was even more aggressive than before. Although he wasn't my boss, just a colleague, and we were in different teams, it wasn't a big deal. But having him make sarcastic comments all the time wasn't pleasant. It felt like that lady's words hadn't really affected him at all. One day, we colleagues decided to go out for drinks. When deciding on who should organize the outing for rock, paper, scissors, I lost. I was a bit bothered by the added responsibility, but I thought, it's a fair game, so it is what it is. But then,
Is Elias even capable? He's broke, probably doesn't know any decent places. I ran into him at an upscale place once, and the old man with him looked so out of place in his raggedy work clothes. Poor guy probably doesn't even know what dress code means. Feels risky leaving the planning to someone who lacks basic common sense.
I couldn't believe he was bringing up something from weeks ago. I admit, if I was going to an upscale place, I should have been more considerate about the dress code. I wanted to surprise my dad, so I didn't tell him where we were going. He came rushing straight from work, so yes, he wasn't dressed the best. But was there really a need to spread this and make snide remarks? I was truly fed up with Luca's behavior. At the same time, I loathed my inability to stand up to him. In that moment, all I could think of was how to get through the situation without causing a scene. Then, out of the blue,
If we're going somewhere with a dress code, count me out. Too much hassle.
Hannah, one of my colleagues, chimed in. She was an attractive and popular employee with a bright and kind personality, almost model-like. Plus, she was well regarded for her work. It seemed Luca was caught off guard by Hannah's words, and he hastily replied,
No, Hannah, you're always good, always dressed nicely. You wouldn't be embarrassed.
He probably meant it as a compliment, but it seemed to backfire. Hannah responded with,
I grew up in a poor household with just my mom. So, doesn't that make us the same? Why the discrimination? Honestly, with someone like you around, Luca, even the fanciest food would taste bland. Maybe you should try thinking about how others feel for once.
Every word that Hannah said was straight and true. No one could argue with her. But at the same time, I thought it was rare for someone to convey things so directly. That's why, in my mind, Hannah's directness suddenly overlapped with the unknown woman I met at that upscale restaurant. Naturally, Luca was in a state of shock, unable to retort. Not knowing what to say, I opened my mouth to at least thank her. Just then, from behind,
You didn't argue back again, did you?
turning around, there stood the woman in a kimono I met at that fancy sushi restaurant. What? Why? The one surprised were Luca and me, and one other.
Grandma, why are you here?
It was Hannah.
Why? Is it wrong to come to my own company?
The woman said to Hannah,
It's not bad, but are you sure you're okay physically?
and sounded genuinely concerned. With unexpected things happening one after another, my mind was struggling to keep up. But when I sorted it out, it seemed that Hannah and that woman were granddaughter and grandmother. Realizing that Hannah's straightforward way of speaking was inherited from her grandmother made sense somehow. And then I was surprised to learn that Hannah's grandma was the representative of this company. Of course, I had seen the president's face, a woman in her 50s, so neither Luca nor I knew about Hannah's grandma. In fact, since grandma was frail, she had retired from active duty, and a few years ago, Hannah's mother took over the company. No one knew that Hannah was the daughter of the company's president. A story I learned later was that Hannah's mother had eloped and married, and apparently had cut ties with this company and her grandma for a while. But after Hannah's father fell seriously ill and passed away, despite living a poor life, mother and daughter were persuaded to take over the company, and now have a good relationship. Such a grandma, who you would never think was ill, stood up straight in front of Luca.
You haven't learned anything since then, have you? You seem to be very confident that you're rich, but whose money is that? It's not your own money, but rather you're a boy gnawing at the legs of the parents who raised you. It's not your place to comment on others' financial situations. Besides, you're working in the same company, so there's no hierarchy. You haven't won with your own abilities. Recognize that you're on the same playing field as him. If you don't know your place, you can't improve yourself.
Grandma spoke to Luca even more forcefully than before. I was truly grateful for her to speak so bluntly about things I wanted but couldn't respond to. And even though she was saying harsh things, I didn't feel she was being mean. It was probably because her character itself was straightforward without any obscurity. I felt that way, just as Grandma's lecture to Luca had settled down and I was about to express my thanks. Thank you so much. She turned sharply toward me at that moment.
You too, dear. It's good to be kind, but you must argue when necessary. If you don't have that kind of strength, you won't be able to properly protect people in your life.
She talked to me on and on like that. Since meeting her at the restaurant, I had painfully felt that it's not only about settling things calmly. I want to become someone who can speak up when necessary to protect my own dignity and that of the people I care about. That's how I began to feel.
I hope that obnoxious guy learned his lesson.
I told my father about what happened today at the ramen shop near my new house. Then, after hearing his reply, I was sure Dad had heard what Luca had said at that time. The supposedly tactless dad didn't change his face and didn't say a word till now. You did hear it after all. Why didn't you say anything? I asked, curious.
Because he's your colleague. You're a grown man in your own right. You have your way of thinking. It's not my place to butt in on something like that.
It might have been the warmth of the hamburger, but my heart felt warm. There are many things that can be protected by clearly expressing oneself, like Hannah's grandma, but there is also a kindness in not saying anything, like my father's way. Being able to discern between the two might be what it means to truly grow up. I want to become a strong person who can protect the important people in my life without forgetting either of those aspects.